Hey friends, this is our inaugural Christmas broadcast. As we ramp up to this beautiful holiday season, we want to talk to you about so many important things that are happening not only in our state and in our nation, but in the nations of the world. We're going to just briefly touch on the recent redistricting flop that happened in the Senate, why the flop is so critical, why this leadership is so disappointing, and what's really at stake, which leads us back to where we were, my goodness, just a little over a year ago when we had this massive illegal immigration open border policy by the Biden administration and all the fallout from that right now. We're going to talk about what's happening up in Minnesota. We're going to talk about the shooting that took place over in Australia and a host of other challenges, including President Trump's challenge to Western Europe to either follow our values, what used to be our shared values, or suffer what they have called civilizational erasure. Lots of important things to talk about as it relates to our government and the policies and where they're leading us as a nation. We hope you'll join us.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Hey, and we want to wish you guys an early Christmas from Andrew and myself and Matthew here in our studio. We will not be recording next Monday to air on Christmas Day. I can't imagine you guys would have other things to do on Christmas Day. I mean, we really wrestled with this decision. Yeah. I mean, we wrestled for weeks, perhaps months, to figure out if we should actually release this and then break up your Christmas festivities. I don't want to cause marital problems. I don't want strain with kids.
We want to talk about immigration.
Hey, where's Dad? Oh, he's going to listen to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast on Christmas morning. So anyway, that was a good call. Absolutely. I think you all would think that was a really good call. But anyway, we can plug Christmas because this coming Sunday will be our Christmas. Well, I guess we're in a great series right now. It's not going to be anything special other than our normal awesome special Sunday morning, but we are going to have our candlelight service that coming week. That will be happening on the 23rd, 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock.
The Tuesday night.
Tuesday night? 23rd? Tuesday night.
So it's not on Christmas Eve this year.
It's the Christmas Eve service, yes, which we like because a lot of families do stuff on Christmas Eve. Yeah. It's kind of the beginning of Christmas and the celebration. Some folks get together with family, open presents, all that. So it really has worked out well, kind of doing the eve of the eve. And it allows us to extend the Christmas fun a little bit longer. So anyway, we hope you'll join us. And I love what we did. I think last year was the first year when we started adding hot chocolate and cookies, some board games. We transformed the entire foyer into a great place to connect not only with your own family, but with other families. Yeah. Matthew was mentioning Sunday in the announcements how, it's great coming to church on Sunday, but we're usually in a rush with 3 services and all that. And it's great just to have some time to exhale and, to beat you in checkers or something like that. Although I don't think
I want to hot cocoa drinking.
I don't want to take you on any strategic form of game warfare or anything. I think you'd clean my clock.
I actually don't know how to play chess or checkers, or I don't know how to play well.
But I'll take you on to fantasy football.
That's very strategic.
I won both. I'm only in 2 leagues. I won both leagues yesterday, handily. I might add, and I'm ramping up for a Super Bowl championship in my fantasy league. Not to brag or anything, but I did have a good showing yesterday. And go ahead, ask me the question. Matthew and I are waiting for the question.
I know. I actually checked the ESPN score just for your sake to see what happened to the Bears.
They did dominate yesterday in every facet of the game, and the Green Bean Pickers lost, which means we are now first place alone.
When did they get the playoff lock? Are they locked?
We're not locked. We're going to be fighting to the bitter end.
Okay.
I loved what our coach said. He said, hey, 10 wins is great, but we're not focusing on 10 wins because it's not enough. It's one day at a time, grinding it out, which is kind of our approach on this podcast.
One day,
as we're fighting for the future of this country. One day at a time, grinding it out. Now, speaking of grinding it out, we had a massive flop of leadership here in Indiana. We've been talking about this on our podcast. The redistricting efforts were destroyed by our Senate, and so I think it's done until somebody wants to take it up again. Again, we talked about this. When you look at the grand scheme of things and how important the midterms are and how important, I always like to remind people, do you remember 4 years ago or not 4 years ago, just a little over a year ago, under the Biden regime, all the liberties that we were losing, all the attacks on our values, and simply to try to, maximize our representation here. We are a conservative state. The only pockets of Democratic leadership are in Northwest Indiana, where we happen to reside, and in Indianapolis. And again, we have a Muslim progressive radical leading or the representative over Indianapolis, Andre Carson. We could change this. We don't have to put up with this. And yet it seemed to me like a massive dropping of the ball and very myopic leadership, not taking into consideration what is at stake on the larger stage. And certainly on a grassroots level, just simply not backing your president, who is your party leader. So, no one was advocating anything immoral or anything that is illegal or any of this. It's just simply leading and providing leadership for our state. So that to me was a massive disappointment. Did you lose any sleep over that, or
I expected it, so I didn't lose any sleep over it. We didn't just lose, we got destroyed in the votes. And it wasn't even like a close vote. So there was some momentum to push against it. Be very interesting to hear the thoughts of this because, again, the voice was, well, 40% of Hoosiers voted for Democrats. Therefore, they should have some type of representation in Indiana. Now, the counter argument to that is, I think there's like 6 or 7 different states that had 40% plus. New Mexico, Massachusetts.
How about Illinois?
Illinois, who voted for the Republicans, and they have 0 representation in the House. So again, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the goal here? What is the Republicans' goal here? And again, this is once again why I feel like Republicans aren't necessarily supportive of President Trump. There is to me a definite. I mean, Trump's administration is not necessarily Republican, and Republicans not necessarily them. So there's all these different nuances.
That's a good point.
Very, very interesting. The Indiana Senate particularly are, I would say, like old school Republicans, which you and I both are not big fans of.
Right.
And without going into all the nuances, I mean, back when we were fighting for the religious liberty in Indiana, we had to fight the Republicans.
Yeah, we saw a massive fold on that issue of simply trying to protect the conscience rights of Hoosiers, and we were a part of that battle. And it was appalling, really, to see both the House and the Senate cave and completely gut a really good bill that would have protected a lot of Christian, especially in the marketplace, business owners and so forth. But yeah, so that's a good point. You bring up a long history of rhinoism in this state. And that's the problem when you have a majority, a party majority, is the party begins to act like the opposition party within its own party. Instead of really pressing in to, your conservative roots and your foundational principles, it's almost like you start acting like the opposition, only a little maybe more toned down version. And I think that's where we're at today in Indiana.
I think it's a very comfortable place. I hear this said. I don't know how true this seems like it's true. Republicans are much more comfortable being the opposition minority, so they can toss. When you're leading, when you're actually in charge, everyone's fighting to be in charge. When you're actually in charge, there's risk, there's attacks, there's personal attacks, there's political attacks, there's deep state trying to undercut you. You're in danger. It's risky. But when you're the control opposition, you get to sit in your high horse and just throw arrows at it.
Right.
And the criticism is coming in midterms, and many Republicans both in the state and the federal level, wants to get back to that control opposition place. So Trump taking charge and moving and shaking things, whether you agree with him or not, they're uncomfortable with. So I can resonate with that because I understand human nature. I understand that many people, rarely do people want to take risk.
Sure.
And
but I would also say this: if you're going to be in the political arena, that is not for risk aversive people. I know, many times that's the way you stay in power is by staying away from anything controversial. But my goodness, when it comes to things of utmost importance, that's why, the old mantra, don't talk about religion and politics at the family reunion. That's only because religion and politics are two of the most critical topics you could ever talk about. They impact our lives more than anything. So again, I don't like this too. Well, my constituents are not in favor of this. Just lead, will you? Quit hiding behind your constituents. Which constituents are you talking about? How about just you be the elected official you were voted in to be? And if people don't like that, then maybe you won't be voted in next time. But please lead and do the right thing. And so I think we're going to be seeing some primary challenges coming up, and maybe there'll be some shakeup. That's really the only thing that changes a political culture or climate is when you get in and shake some things up, and bring about some change.
Ideal, what happens is the old school gets primary, and you have a flock of people who are risk takers, who will go in politics, not to sit there for 30, 40 years and kind of just play control opposition, but to actually go do something. That is hopefully what happens.
Yeah. And again, if we had, I think the simple solution to leading strong would be term limits, but that's the fox guarding the hen house again. That's probably not going to happen unless there's some radical upsetting. But wouldn't that be great? I know I'm going to be termed out, so I'm going to go really lead strong and lead for what I believe in and stand on principle and get some things done, because I know my goal is not to stay here for the next 5 decades. That would be really helpful, but we'll see. So let's talk. There's so much was happening in the news today. Tragic things. There was the mass shooting at the university, which was interesting because I know they're investigating that. They still don't have the shooter, but one of the young ladies that was murdered was the leader or one of the leaders of the Republican Party group on campus, and there are suggestions that she was actually hunted down and sought after, which would be, again, more and more of this campus radical ideology, violence that's taking place in our universities, which is very troubling. But the other one, which is kind of leading into what I want to talk about with you today, is this larger problem of not only illegal immigration, but recognizing where these people are coming from. And much of the problems that we're having are from people coming in from the Middle East who do not share our values, that are Muslim in their faith, and that are perpetrating all kinds of horrific crimes. This last one, of course, happening in Australia was unbelievably shocking. We'll get to that in just a moment. But I want to talk about President Trump addressing the larger issue of what's going on in Europe. Evidently, the U.S. released a foreign policy strategy that included a controversial claim that Europe faces, quote, civilizational erasure. That they are no longer going to, Western Europe is no longer going to exist in its previous form. These are some of the challenges, and you and I have chatted about this. First of all, Europe's aggressive green energy agenda, they are all bought into wind and solar over there, has made it less competitive globally, despite having natural resources like oil and gas. So one thing about wind and solar is they're very, very expensive. They're very, very inefficient. And what's happening is they're literally, according to, this was an article by Victor Davis, their economy is getting destroyed because they're no longer competitive, especially because of what they're doing with their energy policy. So Trump's saying, hey, you guys need to ditch some of this green policy because it's destroying your economy. Secondly, as a result, the EU has lost significant global GDP share over the last 20 years because of their bad policies. To make matters worse, their fertility rates are very, very low, even smaller than the U.S., about 1.39, adding to aging and shrinking populations. So they're going to have a problem caring for their elderly in those countries. Immigration, open borders have brought in about 45 million immigrants, mostly from the Middle East, creating assimilation challenges. And lastly, military weakness. Europe has underinvested in defense and now faces threats like Russia. So Trump was really hammering them to pay their fair share because they look to us to basically foot the bill and to protect them, and yet they're contributing very little. So I'm trying to find the exact numbers here, but I think Trump was asking for 5%. They were up to like 16%. Yes. Yeah, exactly. 5%. They used to pay 16 to 18% of the budget. And so he says if they want to recognize Donald Trump as daddy, they need to start paying their fair share. So they're kind of caught in a catch-22. They're not listening to us. They don't believe in what we stand for anymore. They become very much woke and globalist and utopianistic in their views, and now they're belly aching because they got an American president who's saying, "Put up or show up." You know, you're either gonna pay and support and change your economic priorities and change these terrible policies and stop the open borders, or you're going to be a civilization that literally erases itself. But don't sit here and be mad at us because we're asking you to be a partner. You know, in other words, it was almost like he was saying, we come from you. We come from your roots. We have the same Western ideological convictions, or at least we used to. Let's be full partners, you know. And instead of saying, yes, let's be full partners, they're kind of pouting because President Trump spanked them a little bit and actually told the truth. So I don't know where, you know, it concerns me. We were talking prior to the podcast. America's going to be in a very lonely place. Rejecting the globalism, rejecting a lot of this woke ideology, this crazy immigration policy. And we're going to be in a very lonely place if Western Europe is Islamicized or continues on the path that it's going and it completely gets erased as a culture. There are some good signs. We mentioned South America. Some other places, but certainly to the north. We talked about Canada last week. Canada's drank the Kool-Aid as well. So I don't know what your thoughts are on all that, but if there's not some radical change, I mean, I shudder to think about what's happening in Europe.
I think many people, conservatives, have loudly wonder why we're in NATO. And I'm not sophisticated enough to know all the history, all the strategic relationships and whatnot. But the criticism is we don't share common values with NATO. I think EU just fined X millions and millions of dollars because of their violation of their free speech. You had mentioned that EU and European nations largely don't have a First or Second Amendment, which is crucial.
Yeah, let's just pause it. Yeah, so there's no freedom of speech in their constitution, and there's no right to protect yourself. So these nations are largely disarmed. You have police officers who don't even have guns, many of them. They have sticks, like we saw in London. And so the average citizen has no freedom to communicate or to express opposition and no freedom to protect him or herself against a government who's becoming increasingly tyrannical. So this is, of course, that's why America was founded, right, for these very things. But it's crazy. I would just assume that would be the case in most of Europe, that they protect free speech and they would protect the Second Amendment. And I forget how unique America, really is. And these are critical liberties that we have that they don't recognize over there. So
why are we in league with them? What are our shared common value besides?
And I think historically, to your point, so where NATO come from? It came from, I think, a lot of utopian kind of ideas. It came out of 2 world wars and the desire that we could work together to prevent a 3rd world war from ever happening. But to your point, if you don't share the same values, you're not heading in the same direction. A house divided is not going to have any kind of strength. We've got no future if they continue to go the path that they're heading. And to highlight this, this is here we are, Christmas holiday season. Here's news: Paris is canceling its Christmas festivities because the risk of Muslims blowing them up is too high. It says here Islam doesn't coexist. It violently conquers and subjugates the, quote, infidels. The latest estimates indicate that France's population is 9 to 10% Muslim. Other countries should take note that even with 1 to 2%, you will begin to lose your country. By 9%, you will have to cancel your Christmas traditions, or you may be blown up. That was an ex-writer right there, not a journalist, but somebody sharing their opinion. But I think that opinion is pretty accurate. Then when we look here, I found this also online. When you look at I counted them, 42 major events where there were public attacks, mass shootings, mass murders. All of them have one thing in common. Want to guess? Conservative Christians perpetrate. No. We all know that's not true. This is all Muslims. 42 attacks, mass attacks, all instigated by Muslims. So there's something with Muslim ideology that does not work well with others. And, of course, that's part of what their vision is anyway, is world domination. So I guess that leads us to that's what's happening in Europe and abroad. It should deeply concern us. And then we look at the mass shooting again that was not only Muslim-led, but it was anti-Semitic. One guy, I don't know if you saw the interview, he said, yeah, I'll tell you why this is happening. He said, we gave after the October 7th thing, we gave $25 million of aid relief to Hamas. He goes, what just took place here today in this festival and celebration of Israeli people was like a version of the October 7th attack that happened in Israel. And he goes, there's no surprise as to why this is happening. Our country is actively supporting this. And there's no moral compass to be able to draw a clear line that says this behavior is evil and we will not tolerate it, because they're in that whole politically correct, moral relativistic worldview that the secular leftists love to embrace. It's a false worldview that doesn't fit reality. So innocent people, end up being hurt and harmed. So that's what's happening overseas. But let's take a look here in the United States. Last week we talked about the Somali welfare fraud situation. Well, now that they're starting the investigation, the data surrounding this is really absolutely staggering. And I'll just hit on a couple of the points right here, because they've done some, for instance, the Center for Immigration Studies found that nearly 90% of Somali households with children in Minnesota receive welfare. 9 out of 10 Somali households. That's crazy. 73% are on Medicaid, 54% on food stamps. Even after 10 plus years in the U.S., 78% still rely on welfare. Poverty rates among Somali adults, 66% of Somali adults, and 80% of children are on poverty levels. Talked about education and language barriers, 39% lack a diploma, 60% speak English very poorly. And then they talk about just the fact that this is kind of the way the Somalis roll. They come into communities, everybody's on aid, and they just suck the system dry. So here's a perfect example where you have a woke government ideology that believes you're supposed to be incredibly generous, massive safety net for everybody, and taxpayers are supposed to fund all of that. And then you have a population that comes in with no intent or desire to build, to contribute, to work, or to do any of these things, and this is a massive recipe for disaster among the citizens. And of course, you have government. I think one of the people in here explained it pretty well. This was from the CIS report. Our investigation shows what happens when a tribal mindset meets a bleeding heart bureaucracy. I don't know that I could have said it any better, a tribal mindset, which is what the Somalis have, meets a bleeding heart bureaucracy, which is Tim Walz and all of his cronies. When imported clan loyalties collide with a political class that's too timid to offend, and when accusations of racism are cynically deployed to shield criminal behavior, the predictable result is graft, with taxpayers left to fit the bill. This is a perfect storm. This illegal immigrant mentality, tribalism. We don't become Americans. We're still Somalis. You're going to pay. You're going to support us, et cetera, et cetera. And then you collide that with a political class that does not want to offend. And so every time you try to hold someone accountable, the race card's played. And we've seen this over and over and over again. If you're just trying to point out corruption or wrongdoing, you're guilty of racism. So this is a perfect storm. And but again, this is a perfect storm of combined identities too, because you have illegals who have just been allowed to flood into this country, and then they also happen to be Muslim, and so now you've got two things working against us. Not only are they here sucking off the system, and have been for years and years and years, but this was interesting. It's not just we have needs, because we're supposed to care for the poor and the needy. The church is, not the government. The people are, not the government. But here you have a situation where I saw the data. 1 out of, I think, 15 of the children were diagnosed as autistic. In other words, they're not autistic. That's not the ratio of autism across the broader spectrum. This was all fraud. They were being framed as having autistic needs so that they could suck the system dry. We still don't know how much of this money went back to radical groups overseas, went into political coffers to keep supporting the politicians who keep turning their heads to this. But I love this final quote. This is from the CIS Director of Policy Studies, Jessica Vaughn. It should go without saying that American taxpayers do not want their hard-earned tax dollars earmarked for local poverty programs that become cash cows for the exploits of third world warlords. This episode should cause Americans to think twice about allowing mass flows of largely unvetable immigrants from unstable, hostile, and corrupt parts of the world to enter our country and establish ethnic enclaves where they are resistant to engaging with or assimilating into the host community. Our legal immigration programs need to be updated to reflect these realities of our modern world. So, amen to all of that. But I wonder again, what is ultimately going to happen here without a change of laundry, a changing of the political diaper in Minnesota, because it stinks to high heaven. But it's largely due, again, to some crazy, false, utopian kind of ideas that we can just open our borders, let everybody and their brother come into our country and live happily ever after. And it just doesn't work that way. To make matters worse, I don't know how we got about 5 minutes. Let's talk about when the church takes stupid pills, because that's what's happening with some of these churches. I had an article that came out here, Away with the Manger, how the left tries to weaponize Christmas against Trump. I don't know if you saw this, but there was multiple churches that are using the Christmas story to criticize U.S. immigration enforcement, claiming that Jesus was a refugee and suggesting that if Jesus would have been born during our current situation, that ICE would have deported him. So we had a Catholic church in Massachusetts, and here closer to us, up in Evanston, we had a church that was doing similar things, had baby Jesus in a zip tie, handcuffed, and all kinds of crazy things, basically hijacking the Christmas story. Let's ask this question, because language is important, and it seems to me it's incredibly mind-boggling that the left, first of all, cannot make the distinction between immigration and illegal immigration. They constantly avoid it. They don't recognize it. They don't acknowledge it. But we're talking about, first of all, is Jesus a refugee Or is Jesus an illegal immigrant? Or is Jesus a regular immigrant? How do you take the Bible and apply it to a contemporary situation? So this article went on to say that Jesus could loosely be defined as a refugee, because a refugee is somebody who's fleeing from one country to another, basically for their life. And Jesus did flee and
Herod.
Fled Herod. But it's interesting, they point out here that Jesus moved within the Roman Empire. He didn't cross sovereign nations, which is what's happening with this whole immigration crisis. There were no citizenship processes, no voting rights, and no welfare systems like today. Simply saying Jesus was a refugee does not address all of these distinctions. Today's immigration challenges involve national sovereignty issues, public benefits, and political influence, which, again, were three things that were absent at Jesus' time. So when you see the left say, hey, we should care for the poor and needy, Jesus was a refugee or Jesus was an immigrant, I think it's a half-truth that's being used by the left to promote a scenario that maybe isn't quite accurate. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I have lots of thoughts on this. My first thought is actually it wasn't really Jesus' decision. It was Mary and Joseph's decision. And Joseph was advised by an angel to flee for his life because Herod is looking to kill him.
Was out to kill him.
So that is the definition of a actual refugee, because you're being targeted by the...
And let me put a cause here. As Christian and as a nation that was a Christian nation, we always had a heart for people like this. I remember when the one sect of folks they were being attacked by ISIS, and they were actually pinned on a mountaintop. And it was only a matter of time before ISIS just moved in and slaughtered them all. And there were politicians in the United States that were seeking refugee status for these people, because if we don't intervene, they're going to be slaughtered. And they were Christian people, so they shared our values. And I remember that administration was very hostile toward those people and very uncaring toward those people. So even in a refugee situation, we would probably find a lot of common agreement that if people are going to be innocently slaughtered, we should do something, even if, albeit temporary, or at least move them out of where they're currently at and help them, preferably over in their country or in another neighboring country, not bringing them, into the United States. So that's one distinction.
A couple other things, like why did Joseph bring Mary all the way, a pregnant mom, all the way to Bethlehem? It's because Caesar was doing a census. So he was in that process obeying the registration and the laws, the tax laws, the registration. So
Exactly.
that demonstration was that even under an oppressive government, such as the Roman Empire, Joseph was demonstrating proper etiquette, proper understanding, obeying the authority in place for something like registration and certification and a documentation, So that's
and they didn't flee to Egypt to become citizens of Egypt. That was not their goal.
No.
Citizenship.
They came back later.
They were fleeing for their life. They returned later.
But they obeyed. They took registration and citizenship and have the right certificate and the right census, all that stuff, seriously. Now, the part that really interests me is the commands of Paul, simple things he says, if you don't work, you don't eat. Very simple command. All the bleeding hearts and stuff like that out there, I wonder if any of them have ever taken someone into their household. Because you and I both have. We have taken multiple
Absolutely.
people into our household and care for the needy and care for the poor and those who can't provide for themselves. And it's very easy to sit in your ivory tower where you have never done it before and you keep taking taxpayers' money and you go do that. But when you have done it yourself, your own money, your own house, your own space, your own rooms, your own food, your own NIPSCO bill, then you just learn truly helping people doesn't happen unless there is a willingness in themselves to work, to assimilate, to adapt a different culture, because what they were doing wasn't working. Now, refugees is a different situation, but from a different country that's suffering, well, their culture wasn't right. So to assimilate to a new culture, to a new household, they need to adapt something different. If there's an unwillingness for them to adapt, assimilate, and change, the worst thing you can do is keep them in your house or in your nation, or your country and community, because it doesn't just ruin them. it ruins the good things that you had in the first place.
Exactly.
And that's
to your point, we've both had folks in our home. We've always had a heart for people that just needed a little help. Maybe they don't have strong family support. I remember having this discussion with a young man. Now mind you, we already have 8 other kids in our house. Right. So it's not like we had a bunch of spare rooms. But I shared with this young man, to your point, I said, look, if you're going to be in my family, I want to treat you like my son. We want to provide a safe place for you. We want to love you. We want to care for you. We want to celebrate you. But it also means we have the same family rules as my sons. At that point, the rule was you're home, you have a curfew. You're home by midnight unless it was some special situation. So one night after I had this great speech with this young man, I was ill and I'm sitting in my front room in my recliner. I had a cold or something. And all of a sudden at 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear my front door open, literally right next to me because that's where the chair is. And then I hear the person walk into my house, walk into my kitchen, open my refrigerator, pull out one of the drawers, open up a bag of chips, and I hear the crunching of potato chips in my kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I called out the young man's name. He walked over. I said, what are you doing? And he said, what? I said, what discussion did we just have? I said, I'm not helping you at all if you can't function as a son in my own house. If you don't appreciate what has been given to you, it's better for me to have you sleep on the curb and go through hardship than it is for you to come into my house and simply not be able to assimilate into the Johnson culture. You're eating my potato chips. You have free access to my refrigerator. You have a roof over your head. You have a bed. We bought you a Christmas present, for crying out loud. But you're taking advantage of the system. I think that happens on a wide scale, and there's no accountability. And when the government's involved, there's especially no accountability. And it's really a perversion of compassion, because compassion should always be personal and relational, not governmental or through some program.
Yeah, even the Bible, when they're talking about handing food to widows, they were very particular about what type of widows and what not. There's so like people think the Bible is all about like giving free stuff away. No. They pointed deacons to specifically figure out the right way to do it. Paul is given very specific commands on how to do it in an unentitled way. Again, you don't work, you don't eat. If you're able-bodied, if you're young, if you're able to provide for yourself, you need to go get a job.
Even with widows, there were distinctions between who qualified for help and support. Yep. Just because you were a widow didn't mean that all of a sudden the church was supposed to care for your needs for the rest of your life. So even there were distinctions, and there's, as you point out, there's always accountability, and you got to be working. You got to be all in for the larger team. All right, you can't be some lone ranger. It's not about you. You can't be lying and cheating and exploiting. You can't be lazy. All these things tie into character, and we completely overlook that. Now, to make matters worse, the National Association of Evangelicals has been completely hijacked by a bunch of woke leftists. They came out with their monthly newsletter, which heralded the Christmas season not by celebrating, quote, joy to the world, but by repeating its annual Yuletide claim that because Christ was a, quote, refugee, all Christians are obligated to welcome all immigrants, regardless of status, into our country, our towns, and our neighborhoods. Now, we saw how that worked with the Christmas spirit up in Cape Cod, when I think it was the governor of Texas said, "Oh, you want no borders? Great. We're going to send a busload of illegals up to your community, and you guys can welcome them into your home and care for them." The National Guard was deployed within seconds, and those folks were being removed from that community. So it's a bunch of baloney. And again, to your point, it'd be fun to say who's opened your own personal homes and cared for these folks. And our point isn't even that you should be responsible to do that, as if the government should tell you to do that, or there's some code. This is purely out of the goodness of people's hearts. Nobody has the responsibility to bring in homeless people off the streets into your home. That's not a biblical responsibility. We do have the responsibility to help the poor and to help the needy, but that doesn't always mean bringing people into your house. We were able to do that. We had space to do that. We had the heart to do that. But I don't even want to make this some kind of evangelical evangelical, add-on to the Ten Commandments, that's what we're supposed to do.
Because there's nuance. It's not just simply like a badge of honor. I got 10 people, squatting in my house. It doesn't work like that. You're not really helping them. Helping them is more than giving people food and water. I had somebody show up at church one day who I don't even know, not a member, and hand me his NIPSCO bill. Say, hey, pay this. I don't even know who you are.
Yeah.
That's not our obligation to just go and pay someone. What's your situation? Why do you want, we're not good stewards of God's resources and finances. I just pay some random guy's NIPSCO bill. That's not how all this works. So again, there are so many nuances that just doesn't work on the we're just illustrating a principle that you can throw these very, very pretty headlines out there, but in practicality and actuality, does it actually work? It doesn't fit reality. It doesn't work. And they can throw headlines all they want. The people who are going to love it, the bleeding heart's going to hear it and go cheer all that for it. But don't say that's from the scripture. I will say one more thing about cheating on finances and lying. Think about what happened in the New Testament. I just read this recently. Ananias and Sapphira. How did the Holy Spirit respond when someone lied about their finances to the church?
They drag them out dead.
So no. How about you guys quote that verse? No, none of these guys want to talk about that verse. I'm not saying like that's what that's what I want for the level of judgment today. I mean, but I'm just saying like you pick and choose whatever verse you want to make your argument sound good. No one wants to talk about that verse.
Cherry pick it. Yeah. That puts the fear of God in you, doesn't it? And they just kind of misrepresented. It wasn't even a bold-faced lie. It was a misrepresentation.
It wasn't all of it. So,
but anyway, this is interesting because the National Association of Evangelicals pointed to the Wesleyan Church's recent statement about the Christian position on immigration, and it had all types of systemic language, equity. This is all CRT language that's now been embedded in these documents. Oppressor, oppressed, socialism, redistribution of wealth, social justice, which, by the way, social justice is not a biblical term. Justice is a biblical term. Social justice is a neo-Marxist term. And first of all, we need to say this loudly and clearly. There's no way, shape, or form you can find one scintilla of scriptural support for illegal immigration or illegal anything. I mean, if the Bible teaches anything, it's to honor the law and submit to the law. But anyway, he brings out some good points. This is Everett Piper, who comes from the Wesleyan tradition. He says, what about the working class folks who can't even leave their front yards or walk to local grocery stores or take their kids to a community park because of literal armies of illegals that now overrun their entire neighborhoods? What about children who are being trafficked and abused by the hundreds of thousands? What about young women who live in fear of being harassed, if not outright raped? What about the elderly couple who still live in their 1,000 square foot house that they bought when it was a nice neighborhood in the 50s, but it's now overrun by tent encampments, drugs, violence, and crime? And I like what he's saying here. He says, and I'll wrap it up with this: legal immigration is a wonderful thing. Illegal immigration is not. Ignoring the difference is cultural suicide. And I think sometimes when our focus is all on this type of woke rhetoric from people who know better, our evangelical leading associations or groups, it creates so much chaos, and it forgets the real victims, which are the American citizens who are in the midst of an affordability crisis and a public safety crisis simply because our churches and our government officials won't do what needs to be done, and that's bring some law and order to the situation. So I like what he says in this article. Christmas is about the birth of Jesus, not an excuse to demonize law enforcement. So we get back to where we started. Christmas, this coming Sunday, Living Stones and our candlelight service on the 23rd. It's going to be an amazing week of celebration as we focus on Jesus and as we focus on the call to reach this world in a God-ordained way, not in a lawless kind of crazy way, but in a God-ordained way. So we look forward to, again, we won't be with you next Thursday. Enjoy the holiday, but we'll be back for the new year. All right? Have a great, great Christmas. We hope to see you this week.